So why you should start your career with a plant HR role, or manufacturing or supply chain HR as we call it, is one of the things that we are going to talk about today. A lot of students have actually got in touch with me where they ask that, what is so special about manufacturing or plant HR? And from my personal experience, I will today share with you some of the nuggets or some of the learnings or some of the areas that I picked up which make plant HR or manufacturing HR very, very special. Actually, plant HR roles are supposed to be very, very unconventional roles. And when I actually started my career almost 15 years back, my first assignment incidentally happened to be a plant HR role. I started my career in one of the companies where I was deployed as a management trainee in a plant HR role. And it is definitely an unconventional role, but there are a lot of learnings associated with the role itself, which can actually help you grow into a very, very practical, very matured, and a very solid HR professional if you do it the right way. There are a lot of learnings in that role. So today I'm going to talk about those top 5 reasons on why you should take up a role in plant HR when you grow as a HR professional. And in some cases I would also talk to you towards the end of the video on some of the tips that you should keep in mind when you move into plant HR and what would be some of those learnings out there as you progress in those roles. So let's start with point number 1 today. Point number 1, why you should take up a plant HR role, is because plant HR role is actually a pretty much a HR business partner or a HR generalist role. So in most of the cases in a manufacturing setup, you will have making operations and packing operations. And of course there are different support areas like engineering, quality and safety and so on. So in most of the cases you will end up being a HR business partner for one of the areas, something like a making or a packing operation. And typically you will have a workforce for whom you are the HR business partner. And pretty much working on most of the HR processes in a plant, so mostly towards execution. So think about recruitment, think about compensation, think about culture surveys, think about various areas, almost everything, performance management, right? So most of the areas in HR generalist role that you could think of, you would be doing as a HR business partner. So that's a good start. That's a fairly good start. L&D, right? Learning and development. That will again be one of the roles which you will be focusing on as a HR generalist. So point number 1, you get to do HR generalist role, which gives you a good start in your career because in your early days you get to know there are different areas of HR, you work towards execution, you learn those roles, and then you develop interest over a period of time if you want to specialize in any of the roles. Point number 1. Point number 2, why this is very, very special or why you can take up this role is also because plant has a very good and a very diverse mix of people from blue collar, white collar and temporary workforce, right? So you have a very, very good mix of people that you actually work with. That gives you a very different perspective of working with different categories of workforce. You have workmen, which are your blue collar people who work on the shop floor, who do the plant operations, who we call as technicians or operators. You work with managerial staff who is actually working in leadership positions, and you work with the third aspect, which is your contractual workforce or the temporary workforce, which itself is a different ball game, right? So you have a very good mix and you have a very good understanding of how these people operate, what are some of those motivations, how do you really engage these different types of workforces in an organization, and how do you get the HR processes done. That is something that you really learn a lot in these type of roles. The third piece is the most interesting one, is about the labor laws, right? So the labor laws make plant HR very, very unique. And in this type of a role, because when you work in a factory or in a manufacturing setup, you are governed by more than 40 laws, whether you like it or not. There are more than 40 laws in India, labor laws, which actually govern the factory. It could be anything related to a Factory Act, Industrial Disputes Act. You can think about Provident Funds, you can think about ESI, think about all the wages acts that we talk of, payment of wages, minimum wages and so on. And of course the Trade Union Act and various other acts which you can think of. So this gives you a very, very solid exposure of how a factory actually operates from a law standpoint. What are the things that you need to remember? And this gives you a very, very good understanding and a very good strong foundation of what are some of those employment laws which actually govern the factory. And a lot of these employment laws are also applicable in a shops and establishment scenario, or when you work in a corporate office, when you move on to different areas, you become much more self-aware of, and you're much more aware of the environment, on what could be some of those tricky labor laws that you really need to be mindful of. So your whole alertness as a HR person or as a HR business partner becomes much more aware. You're much more alert that what could be the possible implications of labor laws in any kind of setup, right? And I'll share some of those examples in the later part of the video. The fourth piece is about employee relations. The kind of employee relations that you handle in a plant HR role or in a manufacturing role is very, very unique, because you can have two types of setups in a plant HR. You can have factories which are unionized, you can have factories which are non-unionized. But all these, in both the scenarios, there is protection given to the workmen under labor laws, right? So the blue collar workforce that you work with are given a certain protection, and you have to work within those boundaries. So employee relations become very, very critical for the company. Any stoppage of work or any stoppage of production in the factory has a direct linkage on the supply that you have to do in the market of your product, whatever product you are manufacturing. And you cannot afford that stoppage of production, because that affects your bottom line at the end of the day. It affects your top line, it affects your bottom line. Hence, employee relations become supremely critical. And especially in a unionized environment, you will have to work for a win-win, so you'll also have situations where you have wage agreements. So these are, this whole piece on employee relations can be fairly different versus a normal scenario in any other HR assignment. So in a plant setup, this is utmost critical, right? This is of utmost criticality. The whole piece on employee relations becomes very, very critical. And the last piece is actually about external environment. So one is about employee relations, the ER, which is employee relations, which happens inside the factory. But the other element is the external relations, where you work with the government, right? Where you are working with various stakeholders outside the factory, which can have a potential implication on your operations of factory. It could be your working with the district labor commissioner, it could be working with the district collector on various aspects, it could be working with labor officials, and also building relationships with the community around you, right? Because if you do not have great relations with community, tomorrow you can have a lot of external issues, and you may have issues in managing workforce. And I can share one of the examples where I got an opportunity to start one of the factories for one of the companies down south, and a lot of investment was done to make sure that we have very strong community relations, by building a school, or by doing some sort of program for the kids there, having a tube well facility. So you have to do a lot of things which build a lot of strong community relations, so that you have a win-win situation for the company and for the people. A lot of situations will require you to work with government to have local employment. A lot of governments and states mandate that you have to hire local people with a certain percentage of workforce. How do you do that? You have to work very, very closely with the government to make sure that the industrial technical institutes provide you the right talent. So external relations element becomes very, very important. So we talked about 5 things, and if you'll see in a normal HR business partner role or HR generalist role in other setups, most of these elements will not be there. A lot of these elements that I talked, apart from HR generalist, will be very, very unique to a plant HR or a manufacturing setup. So that makes plant HR so unique and so special, and a lot of times we miss out on that aspect if we don't do this assignment. So my personal recommendation or my personal bias, because I almost I started my career in a plant and then went on to actually start another unit as a greenfield project. I have a very strong bias to recommend this as one of the areas where you can learn a lot. And some of the things which make plant HR very, very exciting, every day that you spend in a factory is full of action. And this is very, very true, because you don't know how the whole environment is going to be in a factory on a given day. It can be very, very volatile, it can be very exciting, sometimes it can be high action packed, sometimes you can have ER issues, sometimes you can have discontent, there are a lot of things, stoppage of production, shortage of material, you can have n number of things that can go wrong in a factory a lot of times, and that makes it again very action packed. So if you're a person who likes action packed life, plant HR is certainly what you should look at as one of the assignments. And one tip that I have, or one point that I would like to make here is, plant HR, start as early as possible in your career. Because a lot of times what happens is, when you spend a lot of time in your career, you don't want to take the plunge of moving into plant HR because you have certain family responsibilities, your spouse is working, and most of these plants are in locations which are away from metro cities. So a lot of times you don't want to take those decisions because of that. So I recommend start as early as possible. Whether you are a male HR manager or a woman HR manager, doesn't really matter. Start as early as possible. I've seen various examples of women HR managers who've done very well in plant HR, and it's a myth that women can't operate in a plant. I have personally seen various examples where they've done very well. So that's just a mental block, if I may put it that way. Hence, so this is what it is, and plant HR always gets me very excited because, like I said, I have spent good amount of time there, and strongly recommend that to think about that as one of the options. You'll not lose anything. Actually, you'll gain a lot of things. So that's what I had for you today. So with that, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you so much.